Hey, what's up, guys? Ken here from the Retro Toy Escapades channel in Malaysia. So for today, I'm doing another one of the video podcast sessions, and I'm going to be looking at the Star Wars Power of the Force figures that came out in the mid '90s, because this was a toy line that was out during the time that I was just getting back into action figures, and I did talk about this in my last video where I spoke about how Kenner's Alien and Predator figures were the ones that actually kind of pulled me back into the action figure scene. But after that, things were kind of idle for a bit. And in fact, I discovered McFarlane toys. All right. But that's a story for another video because I want to get a little bit more into it. But along the same time as I discovered McFarlane toys on the shelves, it was also the official arrival of the Power of the Force line. And I think that every one of us who's probably in our 40s right now, we would have grown up in an environment where probably there was some sign, okay, some sort of physical representation of Star Wars being around. You see, the thing is that I never actually watched any of the original Star Wars movies on the big screen when they came out. I only got to watch them on VHS tape probably much later when I was in my early teens, and I think that they did have them play on TV. I'm not really sure actually. I think Star Wars played on TV, and probably maybe when The Empire Strikes Back, but probably not The Return of the Jedi. Because I'm not really sure how syndication works back then. But I remember that when you had a movie on the big screen, it took a freaking long time for that movie to actually appear on your television sets. All right. So yeah, I watched most of the original films on VHS, and in fact, I'll only get my chance to actually see them on the big screen when the special edition releases came out in 1997. So yeah, I mean, we did, however, grow up with some sign of these things around the house. For me, I do remember growing up, and they were Star Wars toys, all right, that belonged to my older brother, and he had some of the figures. I would remember seeing some of the figures around the house and wondering what they were. And there would be certain things like booklets and maybe like a notebook, and there were like photos inside. So I kind of grew up knowing about this property, but never actually having seen the movie for myself. And there was a time, I think I must have been like about 7 or 8, and I remember being at the toy store, but it wasn't the toy store in Malaysia. It was the one in our neighboring Singapore, and we actually went there because the place that we're living in Malaysia is actually just neighboring to Singapore. And so Singapore always had the better toy stores, okay, back then in the early 80s. Right? They just had all the stuff, the new stuff. And I recall that it was probably for Christmas, and I selected a Star Wars figure. All right, I was actually allowed to select one Star Wars figure, and if I remember correctly, it was the hot Empire Strikes Back Han Solo. All right, and I remember it because I remember the card so vividly. Okay, and that was in fact actually my first Star Wars figure, but I'm not really sure why I had selected it. This is just something maybe about the card back, the way the figure looked, perhaps at the time. I hadn't even seen any of the Star Wars movies, okay? All right. But that was actually my first ever Star Wars toy purchase. And, when I was in my early teens, I do recall there being a time actually where, I wasn't, I spoke about it in my last video where, actually I was out of action figures, okay? That I wasn't interested in toys and stuff like that. But probably, if I were to think back, at about the time that was maybe about 13, all right, maybe 13, I was first getting into high school. I was watching The Empire Strikes Back maybe a lot more on VHS and stuff like that. And the thing about the 8080 Walker, all right, that was like my absolute freaking favorite vehicle. And up to that point, all right, I don't think that vehicle, all right, that sort of construct, the way it looked, it's ever been replicated in any other kind of way, all right. We've not seen something like that in any other science fiction property. All right, it was just something so utterly remarkable, and because I knew that there were toys of these at one point, and somebody in my friend circle mentioned that he had one of these units at his uncle's place or something like that. All right, it's one of the childhood toys that he left behind. at his uncle's place, and I just developed this obsession. Like I had to get my hands on it so I could look at it. So I kept asking him, look, I mean, can you get down there and can you just get this thing so that we could just, screw around with it? Okay, we can have some fun playing with it, And it's like, I was like, yeah, 13 and I wasn't playing with toys or action figures, but I remember I wanted to play with this fucking thing, all right? So, I kept bugging him, and I think what happened was that he kind of came back to me after a while. I said that, he checked with his uncle and stuff, and, the stuff wasn't there anymore. There was no 8080, there was no, like treasure box full of old toys or anything like that. So I remember being so freaking disappointed. Like the thought of handling that 8080 toy was something that was like I had to do it. Okay, like I had to see what this thing was all about. And somehow or the other, I always felt that. I mean, for the longest time, I thought that that original Kenner 8080 Empire Strikes Back walker, I thought that that one had a motorized walking action. Like the thing could actually freaking move. All right. As it turns out, I found out years later that it was only it did have a motorized feature, but it was only, I think, the front turret that could actually sort of like move from side to side. But still, hey, pretty freaking awesome, right? And since then, yeah, there have been a couple of 8080 walkers that I think can actually walk. They have, remote control or other kinds of motorized walking action. But yeah, I grew up always thinking that that Kenner 8080 could walk. So I think that there was that period that I was actually, that was like the only time I remember, like I was really so into the idea of having, like a Star Wars toy again, the 8080 Walker. Okay, fast forward to 1996, all right? And I remember the moment so clearly. I was with a friend of mine, and this guy and me, basically we discovered action figures again, sort of like together. It's just that I was more into McFarlane toys, and he was kind of more into the Toy Biz stuff, the Toy Biz Spider-Man animated series that was actually on the shelves at that time too. Which I kind of maybe had a passing interest in, but it was the McFarlane toy stuff that really pulled me in. But we started hanging out the toy departments more often, and this one particular day, I remember it so clearly because we came up the escalator, like the department store had maybe about 3 levels, and the toy department would be at the highest level. So I remember we were coming up the escalator. I remember coming up the escalator and turning around the corner to the section where all the toys would be, and I saw it like from a distance. We both did. Okay, like there was this display there, and it's like I saw the wordings, I saw the fonts. Okay, they had had this whole row of action figure cards, that were just on the racks, and I saw the wordings, I saw the fonts, and I couldn't believe it. Right? It's like, is this a dream? And we got closer to it, and we both literally, and I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say this, we both kind of like just gasped. Okay, it was like when we saw it, all right, when we saw it in front of us, and it was like, what the hell is this shit? What's happening here? And it's like, the words Star Wars, the power of the Force, and what was there was, in fact, I think just about everything that was in that first wave of figures. All right, everything that was supposed to be, on the back of the cart, right? Everything that was supposed to be available on the back of the cart was there on the shelves, except for the Stormtrooper. All right. So anyway, they had the stuff like, they had Luke, they had Vader, all the original New Hope figures. All right. Luke, Vader, they had Han, and it was just like, I was like, how can this be, right? Where did these figures come from? And I don't know if this was actually building up. We didn't know that if this was actually going to be building up towards something, all right? Because, like I said in the last video as well, this was like maybe a year before Malaysia had, something like, internet access, all right? It was in 1997 that we officially had internet service providers. So there was no way to actually get news, all right? And if you wanted to actually find out about action figures and stuff like that, you probably had to look through a publication. And those publications probably at the time, I think, I'm not sure if they had stuff like there were one or two books, magazines that covered action figures. You'd have to go to certain magazine stores, and they don't actually let you read the magazines there. You have to buy them, and the magazines weren't cheap. So there's really, there's no way for the average person to actually find out about stuff like this. And we didn't know that there was this whole thing where apparently Star Wars was going to be coming back. Okay, but it seems like there was. Okay, and we didn't know that it was going to be leading up to things like the special edition re-release. We didn't know that it was going to be leading up to things like episode 1 at that point. We just knew that there were freaking new Star Wars toys on the shelves. And I think that it was at that moment that we both sort of like simultaneously decided on something here. Okay, we both decided that we were discovering action figures again, like I said, and there's a lot of cool stuff out there, and they may be stuff that we may be picking up from time to time. Like McFarlane toys was looking real interesting to me. If they had something like a woman with a demon head and a sort of like a lion tail coming out of her back, I might probably pick up something like that. But when it came to these Star Wars figures, it was like we were gonna get every single last fucking one of them. All right, we were gonna get every single fucking Star Wars figure that they were gonna be putting out. And let me tell you, in 1996, that was possible. Okay, that seemed possible, and we did give it a pretty good go. All right, we did. Okay, because back then, the Star Wars toys, when they were coming out, and if you were just collecting this particular scale, the 3.5 inch scale, it'd just be that. Okay, they'll just come up with figures based around that particular scale, and you just have to collect whatever they were putting out by waves. They wouldn't go into all kinds of different directions. All right, it was just that one particular main line. So it seemed like something that we could do, and we went for it. All right, we fucking went for it. Guys, I know that as the years went by, the 90s Power the Force line was not always looked back upon with such fondness by collectors. I know that the figures do have their issues. Most of them, especially the earlier batch of figures, looked really supersized. All right, like look, he's bulked up to look like He-Man. All right, he's got huge bicep guns, enormous chest abs. He looked nothing like the way he did in the movie. But I think at the time, this was the closest that we could get to a modern day Star Wars line of figures, and most of us did not have access to the vintage figures when we were growing up. And if we grew to have a connection with the series, the Star Wars series of movies since then, there was a need probably growing inside us to probably get into the merchandising. It's just that there wasn't anything available in the market for the longest time. There was only stuff like the publications, the books, the comic series from Dark Horse, but there wasn't anything like merchandising until Kenner brought back the Power of the Force line. And for me personally, this was an extremely, when I look back upon it, it was just a very nostalgic, fun, nerve-wracking, suspenseful, but in its own way, it's a very rewarding time in collecting. And this was the first time that I actually felt that I actually wanted to get into a series and actually try to complete the entire line where it was possible. And it wasn't exactly an easy task though. But the figures themselves, all right, they were relatively cheap for their time. These figures cost about about 18 Malaysian ringgit, which would have been maybe about 3 or 4 American dollars at the time. In terms of collectability, this was something that you could actually pursue, right? It had the right price point, mostly, I would say. And it was actually small enough in the sense that you could actually accumulate it. And I think that for mint in card collectors, all right, for those people that just wanted to collect them mint on card, these figures were actually perfect because, honestly, even if you rip them out of their packages, they couldn't really do that much, all right? They had 5 points of articulation. You could put them up on display, but if you left them on the cart and you hung them up on the wall, it kind of did more or less achieve the same effect, all right? This is probably the best series to be kept mint on card, in the modern day. Now, even though the figures did have some eye-rolling choices in terms of the sculpting, but they did have some real good standouts pretty early on in the line, like that Boba Fett figure that was in Wave 1. That Boba Fett figure is, until today, it's still, I think, one of the best Boba Fett figures that they've done. It certainly was the best Boba Fett figure of that scale that was ever released up to that point. Okay, up to that point, this was the best Boba Fett figure of this scale in the market. It had everything, all right? The sculpt, the colors, the detailing was exquisite. The rocket obviously still couldn't fire from the backpack, but hey, at that time you probably didn't care if it could, all right? It just looked really good. And the one thing that it probably had an issue with was probably the stance. The figure was locked in a particular stance, just like most of the kind of figures that were made in the 90s. The legs always had like a pre-post stance, all right? Sometimes you'd be lucky, the legs would be more or less straight, so you could just have them standing and they wouldn't topple over. But sometimes the legs would be in this awkward position where you had one leg that was like posed moving forward and the other leg was like backwards, as though he's in an action position, but he really can't stand, right? But having said that, I still find that this Boba Fett is just one of the best figures that they've done, especially from that first series. Do you guys have him? Do you guys pick him up? Let me know in the comments. The Stormtrooper, the one that they released in the first wave. Now, they've done a lot of better Stormtroopers since then, but for what it was at that time, this Stormtrooper was excellent, all right? And it was impossible to locate. We couldn't find him anywhere. I don't think that this particular Stormtrooper, I don't think he actually ever turned up anywhere at retail locally. All right. So the thing was that at the time, I had my sister. She was working in the UK at the time, and I had to write her. Okay, I mean, like literally write her, and beg her to just kind of like look around the toy shops there, at the place that she was, just look around, and if she could actually locate something like this, all right, the Stormtrooper. And you know what, she really did come true for me. Okay, I mean, honestly, she got me this Stormtrooper figure all the way from the UK. Not the one that's in the picture, obviously, but yeah, I opened it up. But she got me my first ever Stormtrooper figure all the way from the UK, and it was literally, that was the case. Okay, you literally could not find figures like these, and I think that even now, probably if you had like a standard carded Stormtrooper on the shelves, that thing would just be snapped up, right? Because it's just a natural, most identifiable, easily recognizable troop builder. All right, you see a Stormtrooper, you just freaking pick it up, even though even if you had 10 of them. But it's just that back in the day, I don't know if they ever brought it into Malaysia. Maybe they did, but somebody was snapping them all up. Okay, and then we'll get to that in a short while. Now, these figures turned up in Malaysia, started turning up in retail in Malaysia in 1996, in the middle of 1996. I think probably, if I were to think back, it must have been around July or August, all right, because I know it was in the later half of 96. And they are listed as the 1995 Power of the Force line. So, I always wondered about that. It means that these figures were turning up or were released beforehand in other parts of the world, America, probably Europe and things like that. But it sure did take some time for them to actually arrive here. Okay, and it's probably maybe, at the time, this was listed under Kenner. Probably the distributor was, I don't know, also Hasbro Malaysia. I'm not sure if there was a Hasbro Malaysia office at the time, but the distributor must have waited to see how the market was reacting to certain things before releasing it, bringing it in for release here in Malaysia. So it happened here in the middle of '96, and I think that outside of just a handful of really hardcore, crazed, sci-fi obsessed fans, there wasn't probably a lot of people that were really kind of like storming the shelves to pick these figures up. All right, it was something that it was introduced, and I think that it took some time for people to start to notice them and start to feel like, hey, shit, I want this. All right, I mean, this is stuff that I remember seeing as a child, and maybe this is my chance to have these things again. So I think that it did take some time before stuff like this started to really get into motion. But what happened was that I mentioned this, that I was actually living in the southern part of Malaysia in a town called Johor Bahru, and the town that I'm in is actually just it's neighboring to Singapore. So Singapore is just like it's just one bridge away. All right, it's like a 15-minute drive on this bridge they call the Causeway, and 15 minutes later you're in Singapore. All right, so yeah, practically Singapore is like a weekend getaway if you're living in the southern part of Malaysia. Always has been since the time I was a kid. So what was happening was that the collector scene in Singapore apparently was, I think, one of the strongest for Star Wars merchandise in the world. All right, probably yeah, definitely in the 90s, and in fact all the way until today, I believe the collector scene there is pretty insane. And what was actually happening was that a lot of the collectors from Singapore were actually making the trip to Johor, to Malaysia, to the southern part of Malaysia over the weekend, or probably on the weekdays itself, and just to raid all the toy stores here for Star Wars merchandise, all right? And I was listening to this recent, stream by Mega J Retro, who has a YouTube channel, some really great content, and he was on this podcast stream with Geek That Life. Jay from Geek That Life, and also Ace, okay, the guy who's with Ramen Toy, who's doing up the 80s Commanders, the Centurion homage figures, and also the new Silverhawks line that he has coming out. So the three of them are having a discussion, and Ace from Ramen Toy actually mentioned that he was from Singapore originally, and he talked in that podcast. He talked about how about the 90s collective scene with Star Wars in Singapore. And I was listening to that, and actually I laughed because it brought back all these memories of actually traveling between Malaysia and Singapore to get Star Wars figures, because sometimes you couldn't get the Star Wars figures that you wanted in Malaysia, and you just take a bus or a train across to Singapore to find them. And the thing was, you'd go to Singapore and you enter a hobby shop, and the Star Wars figures that they would have there for sale, that they were from Malaysia, right? That these guys went over to Malaysia to grab these figures, because sometimes the department stores in Malaysia, they would have like a particular promotion or something like that, all right? So the cards would be, would have this special promotional sticker that would be placed on the cards. And I guess removing these stickers would mean endangering the cards themselves, okay, like ripping off the card and things like that. So the stickers would just be left there on the cards, and they would be selling them at the store with those same stickers on, those same stickers that were talking about a promotion that was only unique to that Malaysian department store. So that's how we knew that these stocks were being accumulated like that. Okay, now this next bit is important, because I talked about how I spoken about how I was in college, back then, and I had a part-time job at a restaurant. And during my break time, okay, I would make my way down to the toy department that was located in the shopping mall. That was where the restaurant actually was, and I would just make my way down to the toy department and make sure that that I had everything covered. Okay, that the stocks were there, or if they weren't there, so I'd just be doing this toy scouting recon work during my break time. And one particular day, all right, this is something that I'll never forget, because it's the first time that I was actually ever in that situation, in that position, and it was revolving around toys. Okay, so what happened was that I went down to the department store during my break time, and it was sometime like in the evening. I was doing the night shift. All right, I was doing the night shift. I had my break time sometime early evening, I think, and then I went down there, and they actually had this whole new wave of Power the Force figures. All right, I think there was like about, I think at the time the figures were released maybe 3 or 4 figures in a wave. All right, well, anyway, there was just a whole new wave of figures there. All right, and these were the green colored figures, and they had the Jedi Luke figure there. All right, I know the Jedi Luke figure was one of the figures. There were 2 or 3 more probably, but the Jedi Luke one was probably the most enticing. But nevertheless, we just had to get all of them. And I got down there, and I saw the wave of figures there, and I was like, holy shit, okay? Because I'd never seen the green colored figures before up to that point, okay? And this is the first time that I was actually seeing, the new packaging style, the new colors, and the new figures, all right? And the Jedi Luke figure, I mean, the one that was released back then, I think it still holds up till today. I think it's a pretty good sculpt, all right? Especially for what it was during the time. And I think it still holds up. And the thing was that I didn't have any cash on me, okay? I didn't have cash on me to purchase this thing, right? And I had to go and look for a payphone, all right? I had to go look for a payphone because we didn't have handphones and shit like that back then, all right? So I had to go look for a payphone, sort of wrangle out a couple of coins, all right? There's a payphone that uses coins, all right? And I remember I called up my friend, all right? I called him up, and I was like, dude, you've got to get your ass down here right fucking now because the new figures are out, right? And he was like, whoa, what new figures? Jedi Luke, okay, Jedi Luke is there. Some other guys, I don't know who, just get your ass down here right now. So, a friend of mine was living probably maybe like about 15 to 20 minutes away, all right, from where I was, so he rushed down. Okay, he rushed down. I think he took the bus or he drove over, I'm not sure. But he rushed down. So I told him that, look, I can't stick around, because I gotta get back to the restaurant. You get down here. As soon as you're down here, you give me a call. I'll head out with you, and we'll head back down there. And most importantly, bring cash. Okay, bring cash because I don't have any on me right now. So bring cash so we can get the fucking figures. So the friend of mine, he made it down there in record time. Okay, it was like lightning quick reflexes. He showed up there before I even was able to take my next order at the restaurant. He was already there, and I said, dude, you know what? He came to the restaurant. Okay, there's no way for him to contact me, so he came out to the restaurant first. Said, look, up here, all right, let's go. So I had to figure out some excuse. I told the boss, look, hey boss, I gotta handle something like real quick. Okay, I'll be gone like just maybe 5 minutes stops. Okay, I gotta handle something. I'll be right back. All right. So we sped out, okay, back to the department store, all right. We sped out back to the department store, got down there, just, ready to just grab the figures, get them home. And guess what, okay, they were all gone. Like the whole freaking batch of figures. And I was like, no fucking way. It's like, how the fuck did that happen? I was like staring at the thing with disbelief. And the guy was looking at me, Ken, where's the figures? I'm like, look, dude, I'm not making this up. The fucking thing was just there, right? The whole batch of figures was there and it's just all gone, okay? And I remember I asked the store assistant, this lady, I said, hey, look, I was just here just now and there was all these action figures here. They look new. What happened? And she just told me that some guy came in, apparently like not 5 or 10 minutes before that, and just, basically took up the whole freaking batch, all right? And I'm like, that's fucking ridiculous. I was like literally just here, okay? So where was this guy, man? Was he like just, minutes behind me, okay? Like just, was he watching me, because like it seems like the minute I left, all right, everything got snapped up, okay? Now, I have never been in that situation up to that point before. We were like, what the fuck just happened, all right? It was like the first time that I felt like the heat, okay, of this collecting game, all right? The heat from this collecting game is like, it felt that we had competition for the first time ever. It's like, you've probably been through something like this like many times since then, all right? Especially today, in the modern day and stuff like that. But back then, in the mid-90s, this feeling of like losing out to something like that was pretty new, okay? That was pretty new for me, probably pretty new for the collecting game as well. And you know what? It was probably Star Wars that actually took us there. Later on, as the line progressed, I think that the Power of the Force was really notable for also giving fans figures that actually never turned up in any other previous collection before that, like the Peter Cushing's Grand Moff Tarkin figure. The Canon Power of the Force line delivered that very first version of that figure, and they also gave us the very first action figure of Leia as Jabba's slave or prisoner. All right, these were like standouts for the line. I think it showed that they were actually moving in a direction where they weren't just replicating everything that came before. They were also giving new offerings into the line. And you know what, just talking about the figures right now, it is just bringing back all those freaking memories. And I'm pretty sure that in my own collection, I'm sure there's a lot of gaps in there still. And I kind of feel like I want to revisit it again, okay? I definitely don't have that set of Ugnaughts, okay? Those little, tiny little troll-like workers, the Ugnaughts, okay, right? I don't have that, okay? I remember I always wanted to get that. It just turns out to be pretty hard to find. I probably feel like I want to revisit the line once again. Let me know what you guys think of the Power of the Force line from Canon 1995. Let me know what you guys think of the line. Were you guys collecting it back then? Are you guys fans of this particular series of toys? Do you guys collect Star Wars? All right, are you still a Star Wars collector today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you guys. Let me know if you enjoyed the podcast as well, if you want to hear me do more of this stuff. I'll catch you guys again real soon, with more content. Thank you and take care.